Der Krieg in der Ukraine war das wichtigste Ereignis in diesem Jahr. Können Sie uns mehr über die Vorgeschichte dieses Krieges erzählen?
The war in Ukraine was the most important event in this year. Can you please tell us a bit more about the prelude to this war?
Sure. I mean, you're absolutely correct. The narrative right now is that this is an unprovoked aggression on the part of Russia that began on February 24th of this year. And they're just dismissive of the Russian, the Russian narrative that holds that there are actually two major components to this conflict. One is, of course, the 8-year bombardment of Donbass, of the Russian ethnic Russian population of the Donbass, Donetsk, Lugansk, by the Ukrainian forces. That designed to inflict harm on these people. 14,000 dead. Now, many of those are combatants. A significant number, not the majority, are Ukrainian combatants. That's some Ukrainian civilians. The majority are the ethnic Russian combatants, with a significant number of Russian civilians that died in this 8 years. I'm drawn to the statement of Petro Poroshenko that he made during this portion of the fight. He was then the president of Ukraine, and he said that Ukrainian children will go to school, walking in the sun, things of that nature, while the children of the Donbass will be cowering in their basements by being bombarded. This human factor, this need to save the ethnic Russian population of Donbass is very much a part of this conflict. So yes, we can say that what precipitated this conflict in the East, the coup d'état, or the color revolution, or the people's revolution, whatever you want to call it, there was an event in Kiev, the Maidan, that overthrew the constitutionally elected government of Viktor Yanukovych, replaced it with a hand-picked team of ultra-nationalist revolutionaries, empowered by the United States and the European Union, who then embarked on a policy of targeted cultural genocide of Russia, inclusive of using brutal force to terrorize and intimidate the ethnic Russian population of Ukraine. This led to an outbreak of fighting in 2014. That there was a period of time in September 2014 where things weren't going well for Ukraine. The Ukrainian military was surrounded in certain villages. The Russians had intervened, and the Russians were on the cusp of destroying the Ukrainian military when Angela Merkel and President Hollande of France formed something called the Normandy Format. They intervened with Russia and begged Putin to come up with a ceasefire, to stop the fighting, to save the Ukrainian army. And in exchange for this, there would be a negotiated settlement that brought an end to the conflict, that recognized the autonomy of the ethnic Russian population, guaranteed their ability to speak Russian, worship the way they want to worship, read the books they want to read, embrace Russian culture, Russian history. And now it turns out, and we talked about this before, so I don't need to belabor the point, that was just a lie on the part of Angela Merkel, that simply she was buying time to build up the Ukrainian military. Why is this important, though? It shows that the conflict didn't begin on February 24th. By Angela Merkel's own words, this conflict was always brewing, this decisive conflict. It began in 2014, that this interlude, this 8-year interlude, was simply a sham ceasefire promoted by the Germans and the French to buy the Ukrainian military time to rebuild, reconstitute, so they could continue the conflict with Russia in their favor. So there is a direct line between 2014 and 2022. So at a minimum, you can say that this conflict began in 2014. But I would say that there's another aspect to this, which is, of course, the NATO aspect. So this conflict, I believe, can be traced back to 2008. When NATO, through the Bucharest conference, invited Ukraine to join. Why is this important? In the lead up to the 2008 Bucharest conference, earlier in 2008, then U.S. Ambassador to Russia, William Burns, wrote a memorandum called Niet means Niet. It talked about the expansion of NATO to try and lure Ukraine away from the Russian orbit. And he said that Russia has a red line here, and that for NATO to continue to pursue this policy will lead to the inevitability of conflict, which at a minimum will cost Ukraine the Donbass and Crimea. This was a memorandum written in February 2008 that laid out in stark terms what the consequences of NATO expansion would be, and yet NATO continued to expand. So I would say that this conflict actually began at that point, when it became clear what the consequences of NATO expansion were, and NATO made a decision to expand anyways. And what is the end result? Ukraine has lost the Donbass, they've lost Crimea, and they've lost two other republics. So this is a conflict that's far more complicated than simply, Russia, having it out for the Ukrainians. This is a conflict that was begun by an ultra-nationalist movement that had, that was exercising what we'll call a cultural genocide against the Russians, starting in 2014. That was predicated by the decision to expand NATO in 2008 to include Ukraine. So this war began a long time prior to 2022.
Was denken Sie? Wollte Russland anfänglich tatsächlich Kiew erobern? Und wäre das überhaupt aus militärischer Sicht möglich gewesen?
What do you think? Was Russia really planning to occupy Kiev? And was it even possible from the military point of view?
I don't believe that Russia could have occupied a Kiev that was committed to defending itself with the 40, 60, 80,000 troops that it had committed to that northern thrust. I believe that Russia did attempt what I would call a coup de main. Early on, you saw Russian airborne forces come into Hostomel airfield and other airfields they attempted to take over. And I believe that the goal was to seize these airfields and then fly in some airborne troops who would be capable of launching a very targeted operation against Ukrainian leadership targets, things of that nature. We don't know because it never played out. Ukrainians resisted at Hostomel. The other airfields weren't fully seized, and the Russians withdrew. And the Ukrainian resistance stiffened from the very beginning. So there's a lot of speculation. Russia hasn't come out and explained what it was doing. I think any military analyst worth their salt will buy into the notion that this wasn't simply just seizing an airfield, that this was part of an overall campaign that sought to have the rapid collapse of the Ukrainian government so that you wouldn't have to fight for Kiev, occupy Kiev. You could simply walk in and seize the presidential palace, seize the parliament, and seize the Ministry of Defense and bring in a new government. That didn't work. Then you're left with, why did the Russians continue? Because every plan has to have a fallback. I mean, any military person that plans an operation that is contingent upon 100% of everything in the plan going right or else, you're going to get the or else quicker rather than later. And so when the coup de main failed, what you're left with is a Russian thrust on Kiev designed to make the Ukrainian government believe that Russia is serious about taking Kiev. But you can't be serious about taking a city of 4 or 5 million, massive city with a force of 40, 60, 80,000. What you can do is threaten the city and compel the Ukrainians to commit forces and resources to the defense of the city that otherwise would be sent elsewhere, for instance, to the east of Ukraine. So I think that the Russian attack on Kiev became a feint designed to achieve a certain outcome. It's also apparently a chip to be negotiated. The Russians and the Ukrainians were holding peace talks or ceasefire talks in Belarus early on. That then gravitated to Istanbul on April 1st. On March 25th, the Russians announced the end of phase one of the operation, and they said, which means that they were no longer going to be threatening Kiev, they were going to withdraw and reallocate their forces to the primary task of liberating the Donbass. And as a good faith effort, they withdrew the troops. This is the Russian version, as a concession to get Ukraine to come to the negotiating table to negotiate an end to the conflict, which would give Russia the Donbass, Crimea, exactly what William Burns wrote about, by the way, in his memorandum in 2008. And Ukraine appeared to be ready to take this deal. And then, of course, NATO intervened. Boris Johnson flew to Kiev, told Zelensky on no circumstances could Ukraine carry this out, or they'd lose all the Western support. And so the Ukrainians threw away that peace deal. But, Russia was apparently not serious about taking Kiev, because you don't give up the advantageous position that they had. They were positioned around Kiev. If you had pressed the attack, you could have surrounded Kiev. You could have starved the city out. You could have done any number of things, but that's not what the Russians did. They continued to feint for about a month to freeze the Ukrainians in position, and then they voluntarily withdrew. Now, this was perceived as a weakness on the part of the West, who then convinced the Ukrainians that this was a weakness, and led them to believe that if they absorbed tens of billions of dollars worth of munitions and training, et cetera, that they could actually defeat the Russians. And this led to phase two of the conflict. But Kiev, I don't believe, was ever intended to be physically occupied by Russia.
Bucha war ein Wendepunkt, der die Verhandlungen zwischen Russland und der Ukraine beendet hatte. Was ist dort passiert?
Bucha was a turning point which actually stopped the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. What happened there?
Well, first of all, let's be clear about one thing. The Ukrainian government knows exactly what happened in Bucha. They know exactly what happened in Bucha. And the reason why they know exactly is because they perpetrated the crimes in Bucha. We know this. We know it because a Ukrainian politician got on the air, did a live broadcast, a female politician, where she told people to stay indoors. Don't be alarmed by the shooting. It's simply the Ukrainian forces carrying out a cleansing operation. This was at the time when the massacre was initiated. We know that the next day, the Ukrainian security services, the SBU, put on their website an announcement that the Safari unit of their special forces were going to be cleansing Bucha of all saboteurs and collaborationists. We know that was taking place. Now, anybody at this point in the game, maybe back then, people could say, well, cleansing, that's like a law enforcement operation. They're just going to go in and they're going to arrest these people. And then they're going to, of course, turn them over to prosecutors, where they'll be afforded all of the protections under the rule of law, in a defense in a court, right? That's what cleansing means. No, we know today exactly what cleansing means. Cleansing is the slaughtering of civilians who were deemed to be sympathetic to the Russians. And the bodies that were found on the street were wearing the white armbands that showed that they were telling the Russians, we're not a threat, or they're saying we're on the side of Russia. They were carrying Russian humanitarian aid packages, which we now know receipt of which makes you a collaborationist. So you're starving to death in Bucha. The Russians hand you a humanitarian package, and that becomes a death sentence, because that's exactly what happened, because we now have a video of this unit where a very notorious Ukrainian neo-Nazi ultranationalist who operated under the name, the fighting name of the boatsman, is giving a green light for his soldiers to shoot people who aren't wearing the blue, green, or yellow identifying armband. If you're not wearing it, you're wearing white, you die, you get shot. We know this happened. We know this happened. It's not a debate. We know this happened. And yet, what the Ukrainians have done is flip the script and said, no, the bodies that were there were killed by the Russians, part of their overall policy of brutalizing the Ukrainian people. No, Anybody who wants to make the case that Russia did this, give me the forensic investigation, please. Ukraine had control of the crime scene. Bodies are right there. So if you're going to say Russia did it, show me the autopsy on the body. First question, when did they die? Every single body should be cataloged. When did they die? Why is this important? Because people put up a satellite image taken by, an American commercial satellite business that has very nefarious links to American intelligence. These satellite images have been released repeatedly to try and shape perception about something or else. They released things that said, no, these bodies have been there since, I think, March 9th, around that time frame. Okay, there's not a coroner worth his or her salt that couldn't sit there and give me, within hours what the time of death of the body was. Every coroner is capable of doing this. Everyone, even a Ukrainian coroner, is able to say this is the time of death. So if the bodies were truly killed on March 9th, as the satellite image and the Ukrainians are saying, you'd be able to certify that with science. With science. No time of death. Mechanism of death. How did they die? Were they shot by a bullet? Was the bullet fired in them once they were already dead, or did the bullet actually inflict the damage that killed them? Were they hit by mortar fragments, artillery fragments? What killed them? Were they shot in the front, shot in the back? Show me how the body failed and reconstruct when the body, before it hit the ground, where it's standing. Then show me the line of the point of entry. Did the bullet come from a Russian position, or did the bullet come from a Ukrainian position? Ukrainian force advancing, killing people. This is so easy to do. The other thing is, what kind of bullet killed them? Are they the bullets that are part of the weaponry carried by Russian forces, the AK-12 or whatever they're calling their new assault weapon, or were they bullets fired by the Ukrainians who use a different kind of thing? These are all questions that are answerable, knowable. And if you're going to make the case against Russia, that's the first thing you do. You say, this is the body. This is the name of the individual. They died at this date, this time. This is the mechanism of death. It all points to the Russians doing it. That's how you make a case. That's not how the Ukrainians made the case. They just simply said, Russia did it. And they ignored the fact that they have virtual confessions from various Ukrainian politicians, Ukrainian security services, and video evidence of the crime being perpetrated. They ignore that. So I'm going to tell you right now, that every German listening there, because I know what I'm about to say is a crime in Germany. If I were German saying this, I would be arrested and go to jail. There was a war crime committed in Bucha. The crime was committed by the Ukrainians. They did it. Your government supports them. That makes you complicit in the war crime.
Würden Sie diese These stützen, dass die USA der große Gewinner dieses Krieges sind?
Would you support the claim that the US is the big winner in this war?
If you go with, if you take at face value, statements made by, the American President Joe Biden about the importance of the U.S.-European relationship. You remember, this is a man who traveled to Europe on several occasions and literally almost cried when he talked about the sacred obligation that NATO has in Article 5, and we are bound by history, bound by blood, we're bound by this. Well, apparently we're bound by only one thing, which is greed, American greed. Because Europe is being used, being played as a fool. There is no American friendship. There is no bond with America. You have to ask yourself, why is America doing what it's doing? Why would they attack the Nord Stream pipeline? Why would they shut down a $12 billion piece of critical infrastructure if they didn't have a plan to replace the lost energy potential with other energy resources that were affordable, that Europe could embrace without going bankrupt? Yeah, yes, America, liquid natural gas, Well, Europe doesn't have the infrastructure for it, and Europe can't afford to continue buying it. And yet, that was the plan. That was the plan B. We would be encouraging Europe, if we're true friends. We would be working with Europe to come up with some sort of protection plan for its heavy industry to give Europe the green light to subsidize these industries so they can afford to stay in business, so that these critical jobs remain in Europe and not flee to the United States, that businesses don't relocate to the United States. But that's not what we're doing. We've created a situation where we lured Europe in to buy into a policy direction, confrontation with Russia, inclusive of a policy option, the sanctioning of Russia, that boomerang back on Europe. Europe is paying a heavy price, losing jobs, factories shutting down, fleeing the country to places where it's cheaper, like the United States, to do business. And the United States isn't doing anything to impede this. We're actively encouraging this. So in order to say that America is the winner, it means America was lying from day one. Because how could America be the victor here if we were to take Joe Biden's words to heart, that we need a strong Europe, we need a strong European economy, we need a strong European trading partner, we need strong NATO members, we need a strong NATO alliance, when the exact opposite is happening? If everything about needing a strong Europe, strong NATO, et cetera, was true, then how could you say what's happening today is an American victory? Because we're getting a weak Europe, a weakened NATO. It's the exact opposite direction. So in order to say that America's winning, you have to embrace the notion that America was always lying about its relationship with Europe. I think we can't give a final assessment on what is the case right now. It's too early. I'm somebody who doesn't believe in conspiracy theories. Because conspiracy theories actually require people to be well-thinking and actually execute with great precision some very complicated policies. I'm a big believer in incompetence and the fact that big governments are largely incompetent in the execution of complex things, especially when the environment is such that it's very turgid and turbulent, which is what's happening right now in Europe vis-a-vis Russia. I think what we're looking at is one of the most incompetent American presidential administrations in history, fumbling badly every aspect of this conflict, not only enabling a massive Russian victory, but facilitating the destruction of critical European allies with no plan on how to do this. Because someday, when this ends, Russia will have won, Europe will have been destroyed, and America will be left holding the bag. But what does the bag contain? What's in it for America? The dollar will be diminished. America's global economic reach will be diminished. America will be weaker. So I can't sit here and say that America's, the victor here. I think America is going to ultimately be a loser. It's just they're going to lose on a different scale in a different manner than Europe's losing right now. Right now, we see the physical manifestation of Europe's destruction in front of us. We don't see that in the United States. But Russia's winning, and it's not just Russia winning. The Russian victory is empowering China and empowering the rest of the world, the Trans-Eurasian Economic Union, BRICS. All of these entities are being empowered by the collapse of Europe and the collapse of the United States. So I don't see this as an American victory.
Wie lautet Ihr Ausblick für 2023?
What is your outlook for 2023?
Well, the outlook is clear, Russian victory. The victory will be political in nature, economic in nature, and of course, military in nature. It's not going to be instant, especially the military. It's going to take time. The Russian president has been warning people about this. I see Russia engaging in a gradually expanding offensive operation that takes advantages of the new equipment and new manpower being brought in to liberate the Donbass region, to push the Ukrainians outside of artillery range of Donbass, perhaps to reconquer Kharkov in the north, position themselves to make a move on Odessa. I believe sometime in the late spring, they'll offer the Ukrainians peace terms. If the Ukrainians reject these peace terms, Russia will complete the occupation of the south, moving up through Odessa to link up with Transnistria. And in doing so, they will destroy the Russian and Ukrainian military, and that this final military victory will be achieved sometime by the end of summer. And then we're into the political phase of the conflict, how to get a new government in place, because I don't think Zelensky's going to survive. I don't think Zelensky is the future of the Ukrainian government. And the political settlement could take another 6 to 8 months to resolve, but it will definitely be resolved by the end of winter next year. Because if you think this winter is bad for Ukraine, wait till next winter. If you think this winter is bad for Europe, wait till next winter. Next winter is going to be the deal closing winter. That's the one where Europe totally collapses, totally surrenders, says we're done with Ukraine, and because Ukraine will have no hope, Ukraine will have to accept the terms of surrender dictated by Russia.